So let's dive in with how quantum isn't a replacement for classical AI, but more of a partner to it. How are you seeing AI and quantum physically sitting together in a data center to create a hybrid workflow?
So first of all, thanks for inviting me to be here, and it's lovely to see you all today. I guess the way we look at quantum and AI is that they are complementary and yet very distinct. AI will definitely help quantum accelerate its way to a roadmap and to Q-Day, and quantum in itself will also help optimize some of the workflows that AI requires, and so it would lessen the computing training structure that's there. So the way we see it is this converged infrastructure is almost like a layer cake of digital infrastructure. So if you think about everything that's come before it, so if you think about internet service providers, and then network service providers, and then content service providers, and then cloud service providers on top of it, AI is the next sort of layer of that cake, and then quantum will be on top of it. So the real magic really comes around how we provide access to this converged infrastructure, and then also how these platforms then grow within the digital infrastructure environment that we have.
Wonderful, thank you. So,
and I would just add there, sorry Ben,
that's okay.
It's sort of the way we see a lot of the hybrid infrastructure that grows today. So these kind of infrastructures have to live together in this kind of converged environment, so it's really important that we figure out what that looks like.
Thank you so much. Well, 2026 feels like the year where quantum has moved from a science experiment to being embedded into enterprise infrastructure. Why is the convergence with AI, rather than quantum just on its own merit, the real catalyst for this shift?
So I think there are two big things, really. One is that quantum in itself is maturing, it's scaling, it's becoming more advanced. So I think that in itself is a very organic growth and allowing for quantum technologies to maybe be more enterprise ready, but also scaling accordingly. I think I also want to not underestimate the Jensen Huang Effect, as I call it, and that is the effect that up until, I think, CES in 2025, Jensen was very skeptical about sort of quantum technologies and what would happen there. And it wasn't, and I think he wiped about billions, I think it's 8 billion off the market when he said there will be no useful quantum computers for the next 15 to 30 years. So you can imagine that definitely put a sort of breaker into things. And then moving forward from that, actually his effect that he had was really to lean in to quantum technologies, to really understand, well, what is quantum going to do for us in the future, and what's the bridge between AI and quantum. And so he leaned in not only from an investing perspective in quantum technologies, but he also offered all the CEOs of quantum companies a place at the AI table of conversation. And so I think even if you look today at what Jensen has done around NVIDIA NVQ Link, which is an interconnect between his processors, quantum processors, and his sort of CPU and QPU environment. That is an accelerated way that you can bridge from AI to quantum. He's also built Ising models, which is the AI models, again, expressly made to be able to enable quantum processor technology. So those two things in itself, I think, are a big catalyst, is that ability of having someone in your corner that's really fighting for AI, and also someone who is looking at the bridge between AI and quantum.
Wonderful, thank you. So, one of the crucial discussions that comes alongside these innovations and these new frontiers of technology is this concept of data sovereignty, isn't it?
Yeah.
So could you perhaps talk to me a little bit about how, as data residency becomes non-negotiable for many global enterprises, and we're seeing a trend towards sovereign AI clouds, where can consumption happen, let me start again. So are you seeing this trend towards sovereign AI clouds where consumption happens entirely within regional or on-premise infrastructure rather than public hyperscalers?
Yeah, sovereign, I think, is such a multifaceted sort of question. We are definitely seeing the sovereign trend emerging quite strongly. And I would say there's a multitude of reasons behind that. One is around the geopolitical landscape that is currently emerging. I also think that regulation and best practices is also creating this need for more sovereignty play. Also what we call private AI play, so the ability to retain some of that infrastructure for yourself and then use the cloud for burstability or leverage the cloud for AI models that are there. And I think for us, when we look at what's happening in the market today, there's this real pull, particularly in Europe, for new sovereign players that are coming in. And there is this pull from a geopolitical sort of appetite to no longer to lean on global providers for that infrastructure. So what will emerge is one, that we'll start to see more sovereign localized players and platforms emerge. We'll start to see a lot of the sort of country-specific providers sort of stand up infrastructure. So to give you an example, BT recently made an announcement with Nscale, one of the new UK NEO providers, and that very much shows their position in terms of aligning with a UK-based NEO cloud provider that's scaling within the market. And you see the same thing happening in Germany with Deutsche Telekom, you see the same thing happening elsewhere. So I think the kind of proliferation of these sovereign players will continue to come. This will mean more cloud regions domestically owned by cloud providers, but again, access to those providers and the ability for the global providers to also be able to access those workloads will become really important. So again, sort of that movement of data and that convergence of infrastructure will be really important moving forward.
I think one of the things you touched on there, which is crucial, is this idea of scaling, right? So we have to keep in mind the challenges and the opportunities that come with that. So as AI and quantum workloads outgrow single buildings, how does Equinix manage the data center interconnect latency requirements when a single model is physically split across multiple sites?
So I guess we've always had data center interconnects. For us, it's sort of standard practice. I'll give you an example. We have 13 data centers in the UK, 14 this year, and they're connected either by something we call metro connects, which are 100 kilometers, sort of up to 100 kilometers worth of layer 2 infrastructure, or we have what we call campus connect, which is cross connects between campuses. And so that allows 4 or 5 data centers to act as one data center. And so when you consider we're no longer in the era of sort of single centralized compute, we're now moving towards this kind of distributed compute, particularly as AI comes in. Those data centers and then wider, the data center interconnect becomes really critical for being able to stitch up these sort of disparate compute and workloads that are there. So I think for us, the DCI is really important. I think also we're starting to see the capacity requests from customers. So if you think about what some of the linkages were before, we're talking customers that were asking for maybe 100 to 400 gig infrastructure that's there. I think when we talk to neoclouds now, the minimum they ask for is 1.8 terabits. So if you think about that volume of growth that they're asking for between the data centers, it's quite vast. So our infrastructure offers a kind of quick and easy to a certain level, and then we work very closely with network service providers. So we have 2,000 network service providers that then plumb into the data centers to be able to offer the larger capacity requirements that those sort of higher end neo clouds and some of the AI model service providers are asking for.
Thank you. So with hyperscalers now dominating subsea cable ownership, how is this changing the gravity of data?
Wow. I would say, just looking at subsea again, we talked about the volume between private interconnect. We talked about data center interconnect. I think subsea, again, is this kind of big area that we're seeing huge capacity and volume coming in. So I think, just to give you a couple of numbers to mull over, I think in 2024, it was predicted that there were 39, I think, exabytes of AI traffic. And then 7 years, there's going to be 2,380 exabytes. So if you think of that volume of scale of AI traffic that's growing, that's there, that will be handled by some of the subsea that's coming in. And then I think also last year was the biggest year for subsea deployed cables. So I think there was 116,000 kilometers worth of fiber optic cable that was laid, that was ready for service last year, which is the biggest year to date that's happened. So you think about the amount of volume that's coming in from the subsea perspective. You then think of the DCI connects, you think of all of this data center infrastructure that's being built for some of these AI models, and you get a sense of the size of what we're looking at moving forward.
I mean, some of those numbers are dizzying, aren't they? So
they are, yeah.
Let's shift the conversation from connectivity to cooling. So we're already seeing in this industry that people are struggling with the cooling demands of AI GPUs. How do you integrate quantum systems that require temperatures near absolute zero into a facility that is already running hot from AI?
So I think today we can accommodate it for sure, because that technology is emerging and it's just scaling. I think the kind of considerations we have today is really about placement of these quantum computers, and we have multiple models of how these quantum computers are deployed to build this kind of converged end-to-end infrastructure. So in some cases, these quantum computers are actually physically put in a data center. We have one running in Tokyo TY11 with Oxford Quantum Circuits. And there you've got to be really clever about how you get the quantum computer in, how you handle those cryogenics, and then also how you house them, and where you house the other customers that potentially have vibration sensitive sort of noise that would affect the quantum computer. And there are particular quantum computers that are, I would say, more sensitive to vibrations. So anything that are around sort of superconducting circuits. So those are the beautiful chandelier quantum computers that are there. Quantum dots, those are two modalities that are very sensitive to noise. So I think today we can handle it. It's really about placement. I think in the future, data center companies like ourselves and others will have to scale. So we will have to look at, well, how do we build for quantum computers that come into the data centers, and then how do we build for what we call QCAS? And so QCAS, or hybrid quantum, is really where that sort of converged infrastructure sits, and that HPC environment or that AI environment needs to sit within a data center. And so not necessarily, quantum computers don't necessarily always have to sit within the data center, and so understanding which ones do and which ones don't is going to be really, really key to that. But I hear you in terms of the sort of challenge of how do we sort of accommodate that, and I also think it's the same question we have today around AI. So we have the same question around, how much of our infrastructure should we dedicate to liquid cooling? What percentage is that? Where should that sit? And how does that impact our retail customers? And should we be building a bespoke, business unit that very much looks at that infrastructure that is very tailored to that particular set of customers? We obviously did that with our xScale business. So our xScale business is focused around our hyperscaler business, and so we specifically built infrastructure that's very, very tailored to them. And then our retail data centers then tie back to the cloud on-ramps to those hyperscalers. So I think the same sort of thing will happen for quantum as it comes in. We'll have to be agile and look to co-innovate and co-design what that next era of data center design will look like.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about the ROI of quantum for industries. So in complex industries like pharma or finance, how much time to result are early adopters actually saving by using quantum enhanced AI models compared to their traditional methods?
So I think the ones that we see in terms of examples range between sort of 30 to 35% in terms of advantage. I guess one of the examples that is public that we can talk about is HSBC. So they ran a really successful trial with IBM looking at how they could prove advantage over classical computing infrastructures for their bond market. And I think their results quoted in the press were around 34% advantage over classical infrastructure. Another customer that we can talk about is a customer called Qubit Pharmaceutical. So if you haven't heard of Qubit Pharmaceutical, then definitely Google them. They're a phenomenal company that's looking at high precision molecular simulation for life sciences. So they are focused around drug discovery. So they're focused around oncology, antiviral, inflammation, all the things that we as humans struggle with as we get older or in our lifetime. They're focused on looking at how they improve and those clinical trials. And so their random sampling that they do kind of yielded around 30% with this kind of quantum-ready AI infrastructure that they built. So in certain use cases for AI, you can definitely already see those advantages. What that looks like at scale will be a different story.
Wonderful, thank you. So if we're going to be sitting here 3 years from now, will quantum ready that you touched on there be a standard requirement for every new data center build, or will it remain a niche specialized service?
I think it really depends on who your target market is going to be. I think if you think that a percentage of your customers are going to be building or integrating quantum as a service, then you should probably consider building a quantum-ready data center. I think for most, like AI and frontier models and LLMs, the parallel is that not everyone will have a quantum computer. Not everyone will buy their own quantum computer. And so quantum compute as a service will become probably the de facto for most people to get to a democratization of the technology. So I think that is where you'll probably have to lean more closely as a data center provider is, do you want to be quantum ready? Are you agile enough to add that to your existing infrastructure where required? What percentage of your customer base will that look like? But also, I think, moreover, the question is whether or not you want to be QCAS enabled, so quantum compute as a service enabled for your customers. So if they do want to consume, what does that look like as they kind of scale up that infrastructure and get access to those platforms?
Wonderful. So we're going to have one more question and discussion point before we hand over to the audience for a Q&A. For the IT leaders in the audience who are currently focused 100% on their AI roadmap, what is the one thing that they should do this month to ensure they are prepared for the quantum convergence?
I think be curious. Be curious about the quantum leading companies that are out there. If the king of AI, Jensen Huang, is kind of looking at this, then we should probably, as a general public and IT guys, look at this as well. I would say definitely keep track of those companies that are there. If you're a high-risk investor, also interesting because a lot of them are going to IPO at the moment. I would say also be curious about compliance. There's a lot of regulations that are coming in around quantum safe communications. So your own security and innovation departments will be looking at this, and if they're not, the question is why not? And then finally, I would say just to be curious about the application of quantum. So if you think you have a business that that quantum could give you an advantage, then definitely it's worth looking at whether or not quantum should be something that you explore a little bit more.
Okay, just before we hand over to the audience, I'm just going to throw one last question
Yes.
in there. Just could you talk to me a little bit about how collaboration can factor into that equation? Because no company operates in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
So I just wonder, when it comes to these innovative frontier technologies, from an Equinix perspective, how important is collaboration in that journey as you kind of move towards these new emerging technologies?
Yeah, it's hugely collaborative. I think you have to have like a customer-centric view of really leaning in and looking at those platforms and sharing where you don't have the answer and saying, well, how do we address these issues? I think for some of these emerging platforms, and I'm not just talking about quantum, quantum is sort of something we're incubating and looking at, but even if you look at some of the conversations we have with the neo cloud providers and some of the model service providers today, we're really looking at, what do you think the next kind of 3, 4, 5 years will look like, and how do we build out infrastructure to support that, and how do we build that enablement layer to give access. So our sort of story is very much around the sort of enablement and providing that access, and so understanding that convergence and where that bridge is really, really key.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So I would love to hand over to the audience now. So if anybody's got any questions, if you could raise your hand, and one of our team will bring the mic over to you. Have we got any questions for Petrina here?
Quiet audience.
Okay, we've got one in the middle there, thank you.
So we've seen some data emerging that women are actually being left behind when it comes to embracing AI technology, and actually that their roles are at a higher risk than men in the same sectors. What would your advice be as a woman who is in global leadership? What would your advice be to women facing this change?
Did you catch that?
So yeah, I think the question there is about how can women take more of a role in the data center sector? What would your advice be from your perspective to kind of champion women in the data center sector?
Yeah, I hope that sort of things are moving in terms of having more leaders within the sort of data center environment. I think I've been in the industry for 26 years, so a really long time. And this is the first time in my 26 years we've got a female CEO. We've also got a female head of innovation and digital. And I think that it's really important to have a good cross-section of men and women and a cross-section of people with very different viewpoints in order to kind of drive a collective strategy, drive everything forward. I would say that definitely in terms of Equinix, we are very much around sort of embracing sort of women in the networking side, in engineering, in a number of the roles that we have. I myself, as you can see, are in emerging technologies and AI and quantum. So I think that really sort of leaning forward and looking for those opportunities and looking for people, who are in those positions like me and saying, how can I get more involved? Do you have any advice for us? There are a number of, I would say, associations already that are formed that you can join, and that's a really good way of sort of getting to know the wider community within the data center environment.
Thank you. Have we got any other questions? We've got one over there. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Doreen. Can you hear me?
I can just hear you, yes. Sorry.
Brilliant. So the main problem or struggle for the advancement of AI is power. How much could we expect developers such as Equinix to provide that PPA, that offtake agreement that matches the term of developing a power energy source? So for example, you need 15, 20 years for solar to be repaid, 30, 40 for nuclear. There is a mismatch. How convinced are you that power is needed, and low carbon in particular?
Did you catch that?
I think I did.
Wonderful.
So thank you for your question. I think for us, a couple of things. I think AI and sort of asks a lot of existential questions, right? In terms of, how will we provide infrastructure to support what power comes behind it, what is responsible AI, how do we ensure transparency, et cetera. I think the real push around clean energy and being able to provide not just existing power through grid and energy supplies that we have today, but also looking really closely at other renewables and other kind of options for energy is really important. So we are a huge PPA, a power purchase agreement purchaser. We ourselves, you can look at the stats on our website, but we've done, that's a huge exercise that we've done to ensure that we have these power purchase agreements. I also think we've done a huge amount of work around heat export, so how we can regenerate and reuse some of that heat that we produce in the data centers. And then there's the whole science-based targets that we lay out around Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. But I would say that really leaning in on new technologies, really leaning in on innovation, and figuring out what we do with the energy created and how we make best efficient use of that technology is really important. And I think also for companies that are looking and trialing lots of new technologies, companies like ours are investing in those companies today to try and figure out if there is a way that we can, even if we secure 10 megawatts over 20 years, that's still cleaner energy for us. So 100%, I think it's a long-term, multi-year strategy and journey that's there around the power.
Wonderful. I think we've got time for one more question. Does anybody want to take the last question of this panel? There we go.
Thank you. Amrin Majid, Ridge & Partners. What challenge in the industry do you think people are wildly underestimating? I know we talk about power and we talk about many things, but what's something in your 26 years that you think people really need to keep an eye on this?
Did you catch that? Sorry, can I just clarify? Was the question there about one of the unexpected challenges? We talk about power, we talk about energy. What is something else that we might be overlooking? Okay, so in terms of, we've talked about power, we've talked about energy and heat. What is perhaps one of the lesser known or unexpected challenges that you think is important to keep in mind as quantum emerges in data centers and as the industry continues to evolve?
Great question, thank you. I think one of the things that isn't very well considered and is assumed is to do with interconnection. And so when we think about AI, we think about these huge giant clusters where LLMs are doing all these big training, how much power they consume, et cetera. When we think about quantum, we think about these kind of crazy emerging machines that are coming and how we can plumb them in. I think when we think about both of those scaling, a lot of it that is enabled is with the underlying infrastructure. And without that underlying infrastructure and the ability to connect into those training clusters and the ability for people to have practical and actionable insights, that's going to be a big bottleneck and what we see for a lot of our customers. So it's great to create these kind of big AI clusters. How customers then consume and use them is going to be really, really important. But also, AI is going to go to wherever the data is, right? As it scales, it's going to go to wherever that flow is. And so that ability, again, to have this flow of data moving around, feeding those LLMs, being able to access those LLMs and being able to drive those actionable insights is going to be really important. I think when you kind of push forward and think about all these agents that are now coming in, if you think about that at the edge, these agents are supposed to make these kind of automated decisions. That's all around data flow. That's all around network connectivity and communications between these different platforms. And all these platforms live in different places. So imagine the mess that is, and I think that is assumed. And so I think that is very quickly becoming a bottleneck for a lot of providers as they start to scale AI, and I think it will also become a problem when they start to scale for quantum as well.
Thank you very much for everybody. Oh, we've got one more question. Go on, jump in with the last question.
Hi, Petrina. Hope you're well.
Hi.
It's a very interesting talk.
You're gonna have to.
I found quantum computing, when you spoke about that, very interesting. I still think it's reasonably early days. What industries are you seeing the uptake and interest from? What case studies?
For quantum?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think those that are standing to make the most advantage are really leaning in. So those with deep pockets like financial services. So they have a lot to gain in terms of that, solving some of those really complex mathematical equations. So financial services, definitely a lot of them are leaning in there. HSBC, we mentioned, is one of the leading providers, but JP Morgan, Citi, et cetera, are all leaning in there. Governments are huge investors in this, and same as AI, because I think it's really well known now that AI is both the opportunity and the threat is there, same as quantum. So I think governments are looking at it and saying, well, we ourselves need to invest and also understand what that looks like. And then I think companies like life sciences, just because the kind of gain that you get from being able to shorten that sort of drug discovery is huge. But also, it's not just huge from a cost perspective and a training perspective. It's huge from a benefit of mankind perspective, which is a huge benefit there. And then the final one I would say is anyone doing sort of design and simulation. So the way quantum is, it really solves optimization or simulation problems. So if you're thinking about fluid dynamic design, anyone who is in that area is also looking at quantum. So think automotive companies or fighter jets, those kind of companies are also looking at quantum as well.